If you are a politician, I'm glad you're watching, because this is a heads up on two huge and catastrophic errors which governments are making with COVID-19. If you're not a politician, this is the beautiful truth.
You are on the next level. This is the beautiful truth, where the expression is still free.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5.
And you are very welcome. This is the beautiful truth on breakfornews.com with Fintan Dunne reporting on the 13th of April at 2 Eastern. Folks, I'd like you to have a listen to Dr. Siddell, because Dr. Siddell has got something to say that is, I think, the most important thing that's been said in this crisis to date. He said it back on the 1st of April. It's still as important as ever. He was saying it because he just realized that he was killing a lot of the patients who were coming into him and going on ventilators. And the reason why is what we need to look at.
Right now, it is as if the train is slamming down the track at an extremely high velocity under extremely stressed conditions, but we don't know where we're going. We are putting breathing tubes in people and putting them on ventilators and dialing up the pressure to open their lungs. I've talked to doctors all around the country, and it's becoming increasingly clear that the pressure we are providing may be hurting their lungs, that it is highly likely that the high pressures we are using are damaging the lungs of the patients we are putting the breathing tubes in. It's not our fault. We didn't know. This is how we treat ARDS. This is how we've treated it for the last 20 years. 2 days ago, the Italians came out with a letter stating the same thing, that we are running the ventilators in the wrong way. Right now, the news is saying that 100 to 250,000 people in this country may die. That means 100 and 250,000 people may be put on a ventilator that is programmed wrong. We can change those protocols. We need to change those protocols. COVID-positive patients need oxygen. They do not need pressure. They will need ventilators, but they must be programmed differently. The protocols in this country, in every small, big, medium-sized hospital in this country, must change. They can change. The time for us to change them is rapidly diminishing, but we do have time, but that time is now. We have to change the protocols. Please spread the message.
Yeah, sorry for cutting the doctor off there at the end. So there is that doctor laying it out. And really, that's a message that should have come from health authorities. There should have been Dr. Tony Fauci up there with that impassioned plea. Because really, to cut to the chase on this, the right way to deal with what's going on there is to admit up front.
You are on the next level. This
ever since
is
the Chinese, we've been killing expression with these ventilators.
Free.
We need ventilators, we said.
Ignition
We were
sequence
100%
start.
wrong. Yes, you can use ventilators to do what we're trying to do, but what we really needed was a way of delivering oxygen to these patients, because these patients were not a severe acute respiratory distress patients at all in the classic sense. They were not suffering from a regular pneumonia. Let me use a simple prop here, like a sponge. Using the sponge, your lung tissue is like sponge. I can actually blow and breathe through the sponge easily. Except, of course, I can't do that when the sponge is full of water, because then it's almost impossible to breathe through it. And that's why you stick a tube down someone's throat, which is a very invasive thing to do. You need to sedate them, and you intubate them in order to blow under force at high pressure air into their lungs, because they're clogged with fluid. Only thing is, these patients were not clogged with fluid. Many of them were not. They had lung damage, but it was consequential to something else. The problem wasn't with the lungs. The problem all along, folks, has been that the virus was attacking their blood. Now, this has been reported on, I'll pull it up here from Time, on the 9th of April, reported this. And this is the way they reported, and this is why I say, politician or whoever you are, you need to be aware of cutting to the bullshit. They said some hospitals have reported unusually high death rates for coronavirus patients on ventilators, and some doctors worried that the machines could be harming certain patients. Talk about hedging your bets. I mean, don't call it what it is. What it is, we called it on Break for News Forum in a post by South Park fan on Break for News Forum, 10th of April, 11:15. Oops, how ventilators have been killing COVID-19 patients. And he lays it all out. He says you should be thinking of this more. It's a terrific post. You can Google that term I just read out. And he says think of it more like carbon monoxide poisoning that these people were suffering from, because CO is bound to their hemoglobin, and because the carbon monoxide is bound to their hemoglobin, the hemoglobin can't transport oxygen. And so, yes, if you give them oxygen saturation tests, they come up that they haven't got sufficient oxygen in their blood, but it's not because of a problem with their lungs. How is it that we made this mistake so badly and for so long?
You are
folks?
on the next level. This is the beautiful truth, where the expression
Remember
is
what he said
still
back
free.
at the beginning of this. He says right now it's like an express train racing on the tracks, but we don't know where we're going. And that's the danger with this. Now, I still haven't seen, that's Time magazine there on the 9th of April, and we're now the 13th of April. It's coming up on 2 weeks. And are you aware, as an individual, from what you've heard in the media, that it's now widely understood that the early thing about ventilators was completely and totally misplaced, and in fact we had 80% mortality rates taking place on those ventilators because we were treating these people as if they were acute pneumonia victims when we should have been treating them as if they were acute carbon monoxide poisoning victims. How did we get that so catastrophically wrong for so catastrophically long? That's catastrophe number one, and that's ongoing. And the correction is taking place. Doctors at the front line are talking between themselves and working it out, while medical health authorities have yet to actually catch up fully and articulate the problem fully and explicitly state the advice fully. So what else is going on? Well, this is going on. This is catastrophe number 2, and this is much bigger, but it's something you can prevent. And it's news over the weekend that despite all the claims by people that Sweden was engaging in a very risky process of not having full lockdowns, like is currently the vogue across Europe and in the United States, has nevertheless seen their coronavirus new cases catastrophically, in a favourable way, catastrophically plummet. Look at it here. Since April 9th, that's fallen from 726 cases to 722, the first red bar, then to 560 or thereabouts, then to 460, then to 330, and the new data is out today. I've got it up in a new graph on breakfornews.com forum, and there you see that should have been, those red bars you see there should have been going off the scale, up off the scale, because Sweden should now be suffering the consequence of their foolhardy actions, according to medical health authorities and the WHO, in not imposing a severe lockdown. But there is the evidence for you right there. Take a look at the death rate as well. Okay, it's not as significant, but in the last few days we have seen the death rate peak there on April 7th, and then it fell from 114, April 9th 106, April 10th, 77, April 11th, 17, April 12th, 12 deaths. Look at that for a collapse. Now, it's similar to the weekend falls you see at weekends. It does fall at weekends anyway, but nevertheless, the new figure for Monday, the 13th, is out, and it's 20 deaths. So there's a catastrophic collapse in deaths. That's what there is in Sweden. It's paying off for them in Sweden. It's paying off, and even more importantly, it's paying off in the cases flattening. Now that's big, because they're doing this without lockdown. They're doing it with social distancing. Don't get it wrong. They're not being, foolhardy in Sweden. In Sweden, they're doing social distancing. They're doing the washing the hands. They're doing all of that, but they've got their schools open. They've got their creches open. And really, there is a battle going on here for what is the correct solution to be applied. The one that Sweden, and here's their latest graph, is applying, or the one that the WHO is advocating. Now, there's a lot of politics in that. And let me get into some of it right now, because Trump has retweeted a post calling for the firing of Tony Fauci. And does Tony Fauci deserve to be fired? Well, here's what he did. He went on CNN and he took this clearly political question from Jake Tapper. A clearly political question which was designed to say, in essence, Trump should have locked things down earlier. You guys were telling him to do it, and he just wouldn't do it, would he? Now, this is a political question. Watch out. Tony Fauci is supposed to be an independent medical expert. Responds to it. I'll give you the full wide on.
The New York Times reported yesterday that you and other top officials wanted to recommend social and physical distancing guidelines to President Trump as far back as the third week of February. But the administration didn't announce such guidelines to the American public until March 16th, almost a month later. Why?
Jake, as I've said many times, we look at it from a pure health standpoint. We make a recommendation. Often the recommendation is taken. Sometimes it's not. But it is what it is. We are where we are right now.
We are where we are right now. Can I just show you what Dr. Fauci actually did say? Not in the third week in February, but at the end of February, on the 29th of February. Did he then articulate that there was a problem and that we needed to lock down and Trump wasn't doing it? No.
Should we be changing our habits, and if so, how?
No, right now, at this moment, there is no need to change anything that you're doing on a day-by-day basis. Right now, the risk is still low, but this could change. I've said that many times, even on this program. You've got to watch out, because although the risk is low now, you don't need to change anything you're doing. When you start to see community spread, this could change and force you to become.
Yeah, so when you see community change, this could change when you see community spread of disease. And so that's absolutely playing politics there. It is. It's saying one thing on CNN and having said a completely different thing back in February. And this is the guy we're supposed to put our trust in, because this is now political football land that we're all in with regard to these issues. So I'm just aghast that we're doing that. And I'm also concerned that one of the reasons that we're doing it is because this guy here is a friend of Tony Fauci's. And so the battle that's being played out is this, that Bill Gates has moved in on the international vaccine scene big time, with free money being doled out in order to put himself in a position where he can corner the market for 7 billion people needing vaccines, which is worth about 7 trillion a year as an industry. And he's got big investments in it. Listen to how he's going to protect his investments at your expense.
The people like myself and Tony Fauci are saying 18 months. If everything went perfectly, we could do slightly better than that. But there will be a trade-off. We'll have less safety testing than we typically would have. And so governments will have to decide, do they indemnify the companies and really say, let's go out with this when we just don't have the time to do what we normally do. So 18 months is about what we'd expect. We're doing everything we can. We'll write checks for those factories faster than governments can, and they'll.
Yes, Bill's just going to pull out all the stops. But he's in a race against time, you see, Bill. Not against the virus. He's in a race against your natural immunity. You see, if you go out there and catch the virus and successfully defeat it, as 85% of people will do without any particular difficulty, 10% of people will do with some discomfort, and a very tiny percentage, about 1 in 10 or 20,000, will die from. So, unfortunately, the 7 billion people that are the customers, which Bill has in mind for his little scheme, that will diminish by every single person who gains natural immunity. So that's why Bill wants you to stay at home in your house, nice and safe, until he can come along with a vaccine for you. I'm not arguing over whether that vaccine will be beneficial or not beneficial, whether you should or shouldn't take vaccines. That don't matter a hot damn. What matters is that Sweden has just shown that lockdown is not necessary, and that actually there is another point of view out there, which is that if you allow younger persons in the economy to get it, then they act as protection for the elderly. And that's just another way of going about it, and possibly a sensible way of going about it. And maybe we've been too influenced by the likes of Gates, the WHO, and others who are playing pharmaceutical politics with this for their own self-interest. So catastrophic error number 1 has already killed tens of thousands, well, thousands anyway, let's say, around the world with incorrect ventilation, when it turned out that they weren't suffering from what everyone thought they were suffering, when it turned out that we've got it wrong. And I'd like to come back to this Sweden situation and the graph that we had a look at earlier on, and their cases per day now. And I'd like you to have a little think, especially if you're a politician. If Sweden can do this, and perhaps in the process cut the economic damage they're going to do in half, isn't this something that you might consider? Or would you rather persist? Because there's a difference between, you see, and a danger between the situation the doctor was in, facing what he saw in front of him, and the situation the politician is in now, dealing with this Swedish data. The doctor was going to be immediately confronted with the consequence of his errors. That's why ER doctors are so nimble in terms of how they deal with things. Because if it ain't working by the book, you better throw the book out the window, because otherwise the patient's going to die. And unfortunately, when it comes to the lockdown issue, the consequence of decisions made by politicians may not be felt for years and not understood, little if ever. The mistakes are likely to be airbrushed here. But it's time we started thinking about whether we need to lift the lockdown, because Sweden has conducted a clinical trial here. You see? It's a large clinical trial involving 10 million people, the entire population of a country. And we're looking at the ongoing results of that clinical trial as they come out. And the purpose of the clinical trial was to determine this question: is it possible with social distancing alone and without a full lockdown to achieve sufficient flattening of the curve to satisfy public health needs and at the same time mitigate the damage to the economy? And the results from that clinical trial are coming in right now live. You don't have to wait for them to come out in a published report. There they are. Cases have plateaued at minimum, it's safe to say, in Sweden, based on that data you're looking at there. And we need to take that on board. We need to take that on board fast. Let me leave you with this one. Who will pay the true cost of COVID-19 lockdown lunacy? Has it been a lunacy? It certainly brought out the latent autocrat in a lot of people in the political arena. Lift the lockdowns and let's safeguard our elders. Why? Because for every one person in their mid-80s to late 80s that we save, with only a limited lifespan ahead of them, we affect between 5 and 10,000 people. If we affect 5,000 people, around 500 adults among those will lose their jobs. This is for every one person we save. 300 children will suffer lifelong loss of potential. 30 families will lose their homes. 15 children will become drug addicts. 10 neglected patients will suffer extended illness. And society will take 7 years to recover. So I don't know if that's the kind of price that we are going to have to pay. And if it's a price that we can avoid, isn't it one that we should? And if we can mitigate some of that by taking the right moves now on lockdowns, then wouldn't that be a smart thing to do? We can handle this. We've got the therapies, we've got the tests, we've got the knowledge. And if you've got a splinter in your toe, you don't shoot yourself in the foot. All right. That's it for this edition of The Beautiful Truth. I will be back with more soon, and I hope you can join me for that. But in the meantime, this has been Fintan Dunne reporting.